Hello there, traveler. I am Leonardo MacLeod from the Clay MacLeod. But long ago, I was known as Ask, the first man created by the gods themselves. And I'm here to tell you about how the Mead of Poetry was created. So please,
Stay a while and listen.
have you ever wondered where poetry comes from? Where do we get the songs we sing and the stories we tell? Have you ever wondered how some people have such beautiful and wise dreams and are able to transmit them to the world as poetry, to be told and retold as the sun continues to rise and set, and as the moon grows and wanes? Have you ever wondered why some people create beautiful songs, poems, and short stories and others don't? It is a long story, one that is not credited to anyone. It contains murder, cheating, lies, nonsense, seduction, and persecution. Watch. The story begins shortly after the dawn of time in a war between the gods Aesir and Vanir. The Aesir are gods of war, battle, and conquest. The Vanir are more delicate, brothers and sisters who make the soil fertile and makes the plants grow, but no less dangerous. The Vanir and Aesir are equal in strength. Neither side would win the war, and more, during the dispute, both realized that they needed each other, that there is no satisfaction in the courageous battles without the beautiful fields and farms to supply the celebratory banquets. The gods came together to establish peace, and after negotiations were completed, they called it a truce, with each of the Vanir and Aesir spitting in a cauldron. Saliva was mixed and the deal was sealed. Then the gods made a feast. They ate, drank mead, and partied, telling jokes, talking, boasting, and laughing, while the fires were reduced to glowing coals. The festivities lasted until the sun came up on the horizon, and when the Aesir and Vanir rose to leave, covering themselves with furs and cloaks to go out in the cold snow and morning mist, Odin said, "It would be a shame to leave our mixed saliva behind." Everyone agreed, so the god Frey suggested they could turn it into something. The goddess Freya proposed the creation of a human like being, so she put her hand in the cauldron and the saliva was transformed, taking shape with the movement of Freya's fingers. And before long, a naked man was standing before the gods. "You are Kvasir," announced Odin. "Do you know who I am?" "You are Odin, the Supreme," replied Kvasir. "You are Grimnir, and you are the third. You have other names, too many to list, but I know them all. And I also know the poems, songs, and killings that accompany them." Kvasir, created from the union of the Aesir and the Vanir, was the wisest of gods. He combined head and heart. The gods fought among themselves to be the next to ask questions, and their answers were always sensible. Kvasir was also carefully analyzing and correctly interpreting what he heard. After a while, he addressed the gods and announced that he would travel and visit the nine realms. For there were questions that needed answers but had not yet been asked. So he put on his travel robe and left Asgard across the Rainbow Bridge. Kvasir went from town to town, from village to village. He met all kinds of people, treated everyone well, and answered their questions. Everywhere has gained a lot from the presence of Kvasir. There were two black dwarfs who lived in a seaside fortress. There they worked in magic and made alchemy. Like all dwarfs, they created things, wonderful and impressive items, in their workshop and in their forge. The dwarfs were brothers and were called Fjalar and Galar. When they learned that Kvasir was visiting a nearby city, the two went out to find him. Fjalar and Galar received Kvasir in the great hall, answering questions from city dwellers, impressing everyone who heard him. He taught many things. When he had finished speaking and eating the offers offered by the residents, the dwarfs approached him, saying that they had a question that had not been asked, but that it was a question to be asked in private. Kvasir, being just a little innocent, agreed to follow the brothers. The three walked to the brothers' fortress. The dwarfs took Kvasir to their workshop deep in the fortress. There Kvasir saw two vats called Sun and Borthen, and a boiler called Orthradir, the ecstasy taker. Kvasir also saw in the workshop recently collected honey in two buckets, and the honey was liquid. After several questions from Kvasir, who was always seeking knowledge, the dwarf challenged Kvasir to say what the dwarf intended to do with those objects. Kvasir nodded, saying, "It seems to me, since you are both intelligent and evil, the two of you may have decided to kill your visitor and let his blood drain into the barrels Sun and Borthon. Then they will warm up the blood little by little in the boiler or threaded. Then they will add freshly extracted honey to the mixture and let it ferment until it becomes mead. It would be the best mead ever created, a drink capable of intoxicating anyone who tasted it, but also capable of giving the gift of poetry and wisdom to those who drink it." You can imagine what happened next. Thus, Kvasir had his throat cut. The brothers hung Kvasir by the feet above the vats and drained every last of his blood. They heated the blood and honey in the boiler or threader, and did other things of their own invention. They added wild berries and stirred it with a stick. The mixture bubbled and then stopped bubbling, and they both tasted and laughed. The dwarfs found within themselves the verse and poetry that they had never been able to express. The gods appeared the next morning asking about Kvasir, and the dwarfs said he had come to them, but when he realized that they were just foolish dwarfs and without wisdom, he choked on his own knowledge and died. And that was how the dwarfs obtained the mead of wisdom and poetry. And whoever wanted to taste it needed to beg for a drink. But Galar and Fjalar only gave the mead to those they liked it, and they did not like anyone but themselves. Still, there were those with whom the two were in debt. The giant Gilly and his wife, for example. The dwarfs invited them to visit the fortress, and the visit took place on a winter day. They took Gilly on a boat trip, but the boat capsized and the three fell in the water. But only Fjalar and Galar managed to save themselves, as they knew how to swim and Gilly did not. Fjalar and Galar overturned the boat and returned it home. Then Gilly's wife came in, asking about her husband, and learned that he had died. Hearing this, the giant's wife screamed and cried as if someone was pulling out her soul. She screamed for her dead husband and swore she would love him forever. And she screamed, moaned, and cried. Being very irritated by the noise, they decided to take her to the place where her husband had died. Arriving at the site, Fjalar shook his head at his brother, who ran up the top of the wall next to where the giantess was. As Gilly's wife walked through the portal, Galler threw a boulder at her head. The giants fell, her skull crushed it. The two pushed the lifeless body of the giantess into the sea. The dwarfs shrugged it, judging themselves to be extremely smart in their fortress by the sea. One day, the two woke up as usual, but did not wake in their fortress. They woke up in the bottom of a boat, and a giant they didn't recognize was paddling through the waves. When asked who the giant was, he announced himself as Sutton, and that he was there because he had heard that the dwarfs were bragging to the winds, the waves, and the whole world that they had killed the giant's father and mother. After some time, they realized that they were being taken to their deaths. So they tried it in every way to buy their freedom. But the giant only agreed when they offered it the mead of poetry. Sutton took the mead that the dwarves had made with Kvasir's blood, and he took other things too, leaving that place behind, and those dwarfs who stayed, considering everything, very happy to have escaped it with their lives. Fjalar and Galar told everyone who passed it through their fortress the story of how they had been mistreated by Sutton. They told the story on the market as soon as they went to trade. They even told when Odin's crows were nearby. In Asgard, Odin was sitting on his great throne when his crows, Hugin and Munin, whispered to him everything they had seen and heard while traveling the world. After hearing the words of the crows, Odin sent for his cloak and hat. He called the gods, ordered them to prepare three huge wooden barrels, the largest they could build, and to make them ready by the gates of Asgard. He told the gods that he would leave them to travel the world and that it would take some time to return, and that he would take two things with him: a whetstone to sharpen a blade, the best that the gods had, and the auger called it Hati. Hati means drill, and Hati was the best drilling instrument that the gods possessed. Then he was gone. Sutton left the precious mead in the care of his daughter Gunlod, so that she could watch it inside the mountain Nidbjorg, in the heart of the land of the giants. Odin did not go to the mountain. Instead, he went straight to the farm that belonged to Sutton's brother, Baugi. It was spring, and the fields were covered with tall grass, ready to be cut for hay. Baugi had 9 slaves, giants like himself, who used large scythes to cut the grass. Each scythe was the height of a small tree. Odin watched it. When the sun reached its peak and the slaves stopped working to eat the provisions, the father of all approached them and very smartly showed the slaves how work would be easier if they used scythes with sharp blades. He took the whetstone from his pocket and passed it over the blade of one scythe, then on the other, until each blade glistened in the sun. The giants stood around him awkwardly, watching the work. "You can try now," said Odin. The giant slaves passed the scythes across the grass of the meadow and exclaimed in delight, very surprised. The blades were so sharp that no effort was required to cut the grass. The blades cut through the thicket stems without resistance. Amazed, they asked if Odin would sell the whetstone. Odin, thinking, said, "Let's do the following. Whoever gets the whetstone is going to be the only owner." And he threw it high. 9 giants jumped towards the whetstone, each trying to catch it with their free hand without paying attention to the scythes, and in the confusion, the fools ended up killing themselves because they forgot that the blades were very sharp and were still holding the scythes when they jumped to get the whetstones. So you can imagine what happened. Everyone. Odin stepped over the bodies of the giants, retrieved the whetstone, and put it in his pocket. Each of the 9 slaves had died with their throats cut by the companions' blades. Odin went to the hall of Baugi, brother of Sutton, and asked for shelter for the night by introducing himself as Bolverker, which means one who does terrible things. Bolverker said he was capable of doing the work of 9 men, and so he took the opportunity to offer his services as Baugi was conveniently without employees. Right? However, as Baugi did not believe that he would be able to do the job due to his small size, Bolverker said that if he couldn't do the work of 9 men, then he wouldn't need to get paid. But if he could plant, build, and harvest and do the work of the dead servants, he would like to try Sutton's mead. So Baugi accepted, and as expected, Bolverker, who was Odin, managed to do all the work and impressed Baugi, who decided to take him to speak with Sutton. The next morning they woke up early and walked. At night they arrived at the great hall of the giant Sutton. There, Baugi tried to convince his brother to allow Bolverker to prove the mead, as it was compensation for the death of his father and mother, and he was also entitled. But Sutton refused it. So Odin managed to convince Baugi to play a trick on his brother. Then they went to the mountain where the mead was being kept and started to climb it. After a while, they started to hear a different sound. Baugi recognized it as his niece's voice. So the two stopped and Odin asked Baugi to make a hole in the mountain with the auger hat. After the hole was opened, Bolverker, in the form of a snake, slid through the hole in the mountain to the end of the hole, which opened to a huge cave. The cave was illuminated by crystals, which emanated a cold light. Odin returned to the form of a man, but not just any man, a huge man, the size of a giant and well presented. Then he moved it forward, following the sound of the song. Gunlod, Sutton's daughter, was standing before a locked door, behind which were the vats called Sun and Borton and the boiler Orthradir. She carried a sharp sword and sang alone standing there. So Odin, using all his charm, introducing himself to Gunlod, and gradually, using all of his cleverness, he conquered the giantess, showing her that he was there only because of her and nothing more. After a lot of flirting, and that's right, sex, Odin managed to convince Gunlod to allow him to taste the mead, and he did it like this. With the first sip, he drank the last drop of the boiler Orthradir. With the second, he emptied the vat called Borthon, and you can imagine what happened. With the third, he emptied the vat called Sun. Gunlad was not a fool. She realized that she had been betrayed and attacked. The giantess was strong and fast, but Odin did not stay to fight. He ran out of the cave, closed the door, and locked Gunlad inside. In the blink of an eye, Odin transformed himself into a great eagle and set out on his way to Asgard. Gunlad's screams filled the dawn. In his hall, Sutton woke up and ran out. He looked up and saw the eagle and knew what must have happened. So Sutton also became an eagle and went into pursuit. The two eagles flew so high that from the ground they were just tiny dots in the sky. They flew so fast that their flight was like a hurricane's roar. In Asgard, Thor announced it. "It is time!" He lifted the three large wooden barrels and carried them out into the courtyard. The gods watched the eagles scream in the sky, heading towards Asgard. They were close. Sutton was fast and was right behind Odin. His beak almost touched Odin's tail feathers when he arrived at the Aesir's hall. Odin began to spit. A fountain of mead gushed from its beak into the battles, filling one at a time. It was like a bird carrying food for its young. Since that time, you can know that all those capable of making magic with words, of composing poems and epic narratives, of weaving stories, have tasted the mead of poetry. When we hear a good poet, we say that he tasted of Odin's gift. And here it is. This is the story of the mead of poetry and how it was created. It's a story full of dishonor and lies, murder and cheating. But this is not the full story. There is one thing left to tell. The most delicate should cover their ears. Here's the last detail, and it is a shameful confession. When the All-Father, in his evil form, was almost reaching the barrels, with Satan close behind, Odin expelled some of the meat from behind, that's right, releasing a wet fart that spewed its smelly meat right into Satan's face, blinding the giant and getting him out of the pursuit. No one then or now wanted to drink the meat that came out of Odin's ass. But whenever you hear bad poets reciting their terrible poetry full of silly smiles and ugly rhymes, you will know what meat they have tasted. And that is all for today, but there are always more amazing tales to tell. Before I leave, do not forget, first of all, if you're not part of the clan, hit the subscribe button to be part of it. Second, hit as well the like button to let YouTube know that these tales must reach others. That way, you can help spread them to the four corners of the realm. And thirdly, ring the bell icon so you can be notified of new tales to listen. Until then, may the gods of old guide thee in thy path.